Tupac Shakur. You know the name, right? It's legendary. But the man behind the name, well, he was a total puzzle. He was a revolutionary son who also studied ballet, a deep poet who leaned into the persona of a thug. To really get the icon, you have to understand all these contradictions. So let's try to piece this incredible story together.
Okay, so be honest. When you hear the name Tupac, what's the first thing that pops into your head? Is it the sensitive artist or is it the bandana-wearing gangster? The thing is, he was both, and that was on purpose. He built these personas. And the story of how that all happened, it starts with an act of revolution before he could even say a word. You see, he wasn't born Tupac Shakur. His birth name was Lasan Parrish Crooks. But his mother, a key figure in the Black Panther Party, was absolutely not going to let her son have a name without some serious weight behind it. So, within a year, she renamed him Tupac Amaru, after an 18th century South American revolutionary who led a rebellion against the Spanish. Right from the jump, his very name was a political statement. So, that brings us to our first section, a revolutionary's son. You really can't understand the man without understanding the world he was born into. And for Tupac, that world wasn't just a place, it was a movement. It was the Black Panther Party. And this isn't just some fun fact for his biography. This is the bedrock of everything he would ever become. I mean, his mom was acquitted of major conspiracy charges just 1 month before he was born. Think about that. He grew up literally surrounded by activists who were being actively watched and targeted by the FBI. This was not a normal childhood. It was a life steeped in political lessons, constant money problems, and this feeling of always being under attack. All right, section 2, the Shakespearean rapper. Now, with an upbringing like that, you'd think his story would go down a pretty predictable path. But this is where the whole thing takes a hard left turn, one that just shatters every stereotype you might have. It's time to meet Tupac, the theater kid. Yep, you heard that right. The son of a revolutionary found his calling on the stage. When his family moved to Baltimore, he just dove headfirst into the world of classical arts. And we're talking the whole shebang: acting, poetry, even ballet. This wasn't just some phase, It was his passion. He was a formally trained artist seriously working on his craft. And this image right here just says it all. The man who would one day become the undisputed face of gangster rap was on a stage, in tights, playing the Mouse King in the Nutcracker. But look, this is more than just a funny story. That training gave him the tools of a master storyteller. It gave him the ability to literally step into a character and make you believe it. It's the exact same skill he'd later use to create all those complex, unforgettable personas in his music.
So, our third section, the rise of thug life. How in the world does a Shakespearean actor become the guy who creates thug life? Well, as soon as he stepped into the music industry, his two worlds, the revolutionary and the artist, they just collided in a huge, public, and very controversial way.
His first album wasn't about girls and cars. No way. It was like a Molotov cocktail of social commentary. It was this raw, unflinching look at police brutality, poverty, the whole system. And it was so powerful that it actually got the attention of the Vice President of the United States, Dan Quayle, who went on TV and publicly condemned it. Tupac had arrived, and the establishment was officially put on notice. And you know what he did in response to all that controversy? He didn't back down. He leaned all the way in. He tattooed Thug Life right across his stomach. But this was so much more than a slogan. It was basically performance art. It was an acronym: the hate you give little infants fucks everybody. It was a whole sociological theory disguised as a brand. He was arguing that the poison society feeds to kids in the ghetto will eventually come back to poison everyone. Now for section 4, surviving the ambush. This tension between his message and his persona, it was like a lit fuse. And in 1994, that fuse hit the dynamite. A single violent night would turn his paranoia into absolute conviction and change the course of music history forever. In the lobby of a recording studio in Manhattan, Tupac was ambushed. He was shot 5 times and left for dead. He survived, but the man who walked out of that studio was a different person. His trust in anyone shattered. He became totally convinced that his old friends Biggie Smalls and Puffy Combs had set him up. This wasn't just a robbery. It was the first real shot fired in the infamous East Coast-West Coast rap war. And then, shortly after that, while he was serving time for some separate charges he denied to his dying day, the most Tupac thing ever happened.
His album, Me Against the World, this masterpiece of paranoia and survival, it hit #1 on the Billboard charts. He was literally an inmate, a prisoner, and at the exact same time, he was the most popular musician in the entire country. Just, wow.
All right, Section 5, the death row gamble. Being in prison was obviously a low point, but it also set the stage for the most explosive, the most successful, and ultimately the most tragic chapter of his life. He needed a way out, and he found one. It came in the form of a deal with the devil, a guy named Suge Knight, the notorious head of Death Row Records. Freedom had a price tag, $1.4 million. That is the insane amount of money Suge Knight posted for his bail. But there was a catch. In exchange, Tupac owed him 3 albums. So he was out of a physical prison, sure, but he had just walked straight into a gilded cage, the very heart of the ruthless West Coast music machine. But man, this new partnership just unleashed a creative firestorm. In this insane burst of energy, he recorded All Eyes on Me, a sprawling, defiant, celebratory masterpiece of an album. It was the first ever double-disc album in hip-hop history, and it was a commercial juggernaut that made him, without a doubt, the biggest rapper on the entire planet. Now, for our final section, an immortal legacy. He was on top of the world, but that East Coast-West Coast beef was escalating into real-world violence. He was more famous, more successful, and in more danger than he had ever been before. His incredible life was cut tragically short, but in death, his voice somehow became even louder.
I just want you to look at that number and let it sink in for a second. 25. After everything he had done, all the different lives he had lived, all the art he had made, Tupac Shakur was murdered in Las Vegas when he was only 25 years old.
So how do we even begin to make sense of a life like that? Well, maybe the best way is to see him as the actor he was trained to be, playing these different roles throughout his life. First, you have the activist, giving a voice to the voiceless. Then, the actor, using his craft to explore the psychology of violence in films like Juice. Then, the martyr, turning all his pain and betrayal into art. And finally, the warlord, embracing the aggression of his new reality on death row. He didn't just live through these phases, he performed them for us.
And here's the final beautiful contradiction. The man that Vice President Dan Quayle once called a menace to American society is now studied at Harvard. His incredible song about his mother, Dear Mama, is now considered a national treasure, preserved for all time in the Library of Congress. The ultimate outsider became a permanent, essential part of the American story.
So, in the end, how do we define him? Poet? Thug? Revolutionary? Well, he actually gave us the answer himself in one of his poems. He was the rose that grew from concrete. This beautiful, defiant, complicated thing that just blossomed against all odds. He forced the world to look, not just at the beauty of the flower, but at the harsh, messed up ground that it came from. And maybe that was the whole point all along.